Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbinic Intern, Adrian Marcos.
And we're going to be talking about next week's Parsha, which is the Parsha that we just kind of read, Emor. And the topic that we're going to be discussing is perfection, perception, disability, and ableism, because this is the Parsha that talks about a lot of things. It talks about all the qualifications for a Kohen. It talks about what disqualifies a Kohen. It also talks about, all of the Chagim, but we're not focused on the Chagim. That's a different drash for a different day. Right now we are going to focus on the people portion. So we're going to set the stage by going back in Torah. We're going all the way back to Bereshit because we can. Who wants to read the first source? Anybody? Brian, okay.
Vayivra Elohim et Hadam et Salmo, and God created mankind in the divine image. B'Tselem Elohim bara oto, creating it in the image of God. Zachar unkeva, male and female, bara otam. He created them.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So that's the starting point for this. We are created in the image of the divine. Sounds great. Sounds perfect. But we all know how that story ended. Things did not end out perfectly. Which brings us to Vayikra, which this part is from Kedoshim, which we literally just read this morning. Maybe. It depends if you went to a shul that did full Kriya or if you're on the triennial. But this is where we're talking about... I can wait. Okay. Here we're talking about not insulting the deaf or placing a stumbling block before the blind, and that we're supposed to fear Hashem. This is where disability first gets mentioned in Torah. And it's really, I've always found this little verse interesting because I myself am hard of hearing. So without my hearing aids, I may not be able to hear you talking behind my back, but I can still read faces and might be able to pick up on the fact that you're talking trash about me. I'll usually just let it roll off me, but for other people, they still might get hurt. Even a deaf person can get hurt by the words that aren't spoken, but by what's on your face or read in your body. And this also tells us that although in Bereshit, we are created in the image of divine, this creates an image of perfection. Kedoshim acknowledges that not everything's perfect. People are born a little differently. Disability is not so much this imagined thing, but it is a reality, even way back when. So now we get into Emor, and this is talking about the disqualifications for a Kohen. So does anybody want to read the third source, which is Leviticus 21:17, through 21? Alan, okay. You could do it in any language you're comfortable in, by the way.
Speak to Aaron and say, no man of your offspring throughout the ages who has a defect shall be qualified to offer the food of his God. No one at all who has a defect shall be qualified. No man who is blind or lame or has a limb too short or too long. No man who has a broken leg or a broken arm, or who is a hunchback, or a dwarf, or who has a growth in his eye, or who has a boil scar, or scurvy, or crushed testes. No man among the offspring of Aaron the priest who has a defect shall be qualified to offer Hashem's offering by fire having a defect. He shall not be qualified to offer the food of his God.
Thank you. So the disabilities that are listed in these couple of verses, some of them are disabilities that people can be born with, and some of them can be acquired. In both cases, they are seen as disqualifying for a Kohen to be in service to Hashem. Do we have any thoughts about that? Yes.
Good luck finding such a person. Think about it. These qualifiers are pretty strict and confining. And if you think about it, it's almost as if it's a joke. It's almost as if it's like saying, good luck finding such a person, regardless of whether a Kohen or otherwise. Who doesn't have at least one of these things. So I think that's also how it rings to a modern sensibility, perhaps. But it also seems to imply, I don't know. It seems to imply that what is outlined in Kedoshim is actually the standard, as opposed to this, which seems to be extraordinary.
Did you want
It occurred to me that this is somewhat analogous to the animals that we're not allowed to offer on the altar. So then I thought, is a Kohen a sacrifice? That is the life of a Kohen somehow the life of sacrifice? And then I was wondering about what happens to the Kohanim. Like if you're born a Kohen, you're born with this purpose. This is what we all do. This is what we've always done. So what if you're born a Kohen and you do have one of these? Like, what do you do with yourself all day? So I don't know.
That's a great question, to which I don't have the answer to off the top of my head, I will admit. But, I mean, you saying that the Kohen is a sacrifice, it makes me think about how on Yom Kippur, when we had the temple, and they carried out all the rituals, the high priest would go into the inner chambers, and he'd have a rope around his waist, in the event that he unfortunately dropped dead and they had to yoink him out. I guess that would be the ultimate form of sacrifice, but it wouldn't be the ideal form of sacrifice. It's also interesting because we're told that we live by the mitzvot and not die by them. So we are going to jump to our fourth source. Oh, sorry, Brian has a question or a comment.
I was curious as to the permanent and impermanent nature of some of these disabilities. Somebody who is blind could be either born blind or later develop blindness. Similarly, somebody who is lame who can't walk may be born that way or develop it. A limb too short or too long seems something that you're born with. A broken leg or a broken arm, those things can heal. Mm-hmm. So you might have a less permanent disability that disqualifies you from service. Hunchback and dwarf are, again, I feel like that's more of a birth thing because you don't have back braces like you would have nowadays that might prevent you from being a hunchback, to use their term. Growth of the eye, that seems more permanent, just given my knowledge of the development of tumors and the technology they would have had at the time. Boils scar, a scar could fade. Scurvy, you could eat a lemon. And then crushed testes feels more permanent once that happens. So I'm curious as to why these are the things and why some of them are permanent and why some of them are not permanent.
I mean, I can't speak to the reason as to why certain things are listed above others. But if you think about the time in which Torah came about, they didn't have medicine the way that we had medicine. A broken limb could be fatal. And also, if it wasn't set properly, I mean, even nowadays, if you don't set a bone properly, it can heal wrong. But they didn't quite have the understanding of how to, like, make sure it was set perfectly. So you could say it's proactive. One could argue that saying someone who has a broken arm or a broken leg, it's proactive disqualification. Also, if you're doing a job that requires a lot of physical labor, a lot of walking around. Like we know based off the garments that the Kohanim would wear, it was a very laborious job that required a lot of movement. So this could be the Parsha's way of saying, well, if you can't do the basic aspects of the job, we're just going to remove you from it entirely. So, yeah. Oh, hang on.
I was thinking that all of these can be detected by a visual inspection. And that may have been an easy way to form requirements. It's just something that a job interview, so to speak, would be able to reveal all of these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I'm short. Okay. That's actually a really good point because the visual aspect, we saw not this week's portion, but last week's Torah portion was Tazria and Metzora. And all of it was a lot about skin disease, but these were all visual. Like the Kohen had to look at it and make that determination. So in this case, the blind part could be like, that's why blindness disqualifies a Kohen, because they have to use their eyes so much. And I will take one more question and then slide into the next source, because that's actually a perfect segue. Excuse me.
It's really, excuse me, quickly, because of all sacrifices required physical labor. Is it possible there's just compassion because this work required physical labor? The blind or somebody who has not deficiency, have really some disability or not able to perform this work, just compassion. You are excused from, rather than disqualified, you are excused.
I would say that it could be a case of two things being true at once. It's disqualifying and maybe a form of compassion to like kind of take the burden off of someone who would have a greater difficulty. But I don't know. I think at the time you could definitely see it as a form of compassion. But within today's framework, I'm a little more hesitant to call it that. So I'm going to slide us into our fourth source, which is Chizikuni, who was a commentator based in France. He was running around about 200 years after Rashi and commented on a lot of the other guys who came before him, because, that's what commentators do. And he is commenting on verse 18, for any man, on the words, ki kol ish, and really it's the whole verse, but he's saying, for any man who's afflicted with a blemish. I'm going to read this source if nobody minds. And he writes that the Torah lists the reasons that such priests may not perform service in the temple as being that, seeing that they represent the whole Jewish community, it would not seem appropriate that this community dispatches blemished people as their representative at the court of the King of Kings. So this kind of lends to the idea that there is this expectation of perfection for the Kohanim, almost to an unrealistic degree, because, as Brian pointed out, certain things happen. They can be fixed. They can fade. And also, as Rabbi Singer Franks pointed out, it's like good luck trying to find someone who doesn't have a mum on them, because also this is the Middle East. The sun is a thing. And skin cancer is definitely a thing because they didn't have sunscreen as we know it, actually. Well, Egypt had sunscreen, a very primitive form of sunscreen, but the Israelites might not have had access to that. Yeah, there's actually records of it where the people who were building the pyramids, who came after us, I guess, went on strike because the overseers denied them their sunscreen. Which, fair, especially if you're going to be in that region, definitely have sunscreen because the sun hits differently. So there's this focus on perfection, or at least a perceived perfection. And we see this perception of perfection, not an intentional alliteration, I promise, but we see it present in this parsha. We saw it in, not so much in last week's parsha, but we definitely saw it in the parsha from last week, where as soon as something was perceived to be imperfect, then the declaration was, it is not perfect, which can be kind of problematic, depending on how you cut it. So, has anybody got any questions or comments on the Chizikuni? Nope. Okay. All right. So, this actually kind of slides us into the fifth source, where it's this is from Megillah, from the Talmud, not the Mishnah, where Rav Huna is talking about what can't a Kohen do, and then the Gemara asks its own question. So does anybody want to read that source? Have the mic. Yes, have the mic.
Rav Huna said, "A priest whose eyes constantly run with tears may not lift his hands to recite the priestly benediction." The Gemara asks, wasn't there a certain priest with this condition in the neighborhood of Rav Huna, and he would spread his hands and recite the priestly benediction? The Gemara answers, that priest was a familiar figure in his town. Since the other residents were accustomed to seeing him, he would not draw their attention during the priestly benediction. This is also taught in a Braita. One whose eyes run should not lift his hands to recite the priestly benediction, but if he is a familiar figure in his town, he is permitted to do so.
Thank you. So that seems to contradict what we just read from Emor. Anybody got some thoughts about that? I do. Okay, Michael has one. He probably has many thoughts.
When you talk about Torah scholars running around, you're certainly living that. I think that it points out, or it likely could be a through line, that there is there's a distraction element to someone that has, these are the people that are part of our focal point, right? They're in the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash or whatever our sanctuary is. That is our spiritual focal point in terms of geography. And then the human beings that are the focal points of that are the Kohanim. If they look different, I'm not endorsing this view, I'm just saying from what I can see here, that could be distracting. If people are used to it, then it's not so terrible. So maybe a more enlightened way to push through this is to become the people that are always used to it.
Thank you. Oh, Alan.
There seems to be some evolving taking place here. When we're dealing with what's in the Bible itself, any of these things disqualify you. You cannot be, for example, the dwarf or the hunchback or what have you. But it would appear that for the Rabbanim later, as a practical matter, when you're not dealing with the temple in Jerusalem, but you're dealing perhaps with other matters or synagogues or whatever their housing may be, if it's not in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, perhaps it's okay if in a particular town there is a Kohen who has this defect, but because he's known to everyone, he can do so. It seems to be part of a process that it becomes more acceptable to have such a defect and be involved in the process of leading the kahal, of leading the congregation.
Thank you. I actually do want to latch on to evolution in terms of how we see these. It's not a source on here. This is me kind of just riffing. But the way that we understand disability has certainly, to use Alan's word, evolved over the many, many centuries and millennia that humanity has been around, right? The idea that we see in Emor, right, that someone who has any kind of defect, any kind of disability is disqualified and therefore, like in brackets and parentheses, however you want to view it in your head, is incapable of carrying out the physical labors of what it is to be a Kohen. Like, Torah's like, yeah, that's the reality that we live in. We're also moving around, so we're just going to write all these people off. It's a bit of a harsh way to put it, but I mean, that's kind of the tone that it's taking. And then Hizukuni, who is many, many generations later, who's like, well, it's because, you know, we need to have this perfection being represented all over the place. Like, we cannot have something detracting from Hashem's greatness and the wonder of the temple. To Rav Huna, who also is like, you know, if this priest can't, like, see if he's constantly got runny eyes because he's got really bad allergies, he can't recite the priestly benediction, and the Gemara being like, but there was already someone doing that. People are in community with this guy. They see that he can do the job, and his eyes, okay, so he's got watery eyes. Slip him a Zyrtec and he can do the job just fine. To nowadays, where, I mean, look at me, right? I'm short. That's not a disability, but I'm hard of hearing. So I wear hearing aids. If you were standing behind me, you could see a little flash of blue. But if you were standing in front of me, you can't tell that I have this defect, right? But this defect does not preclude me from doing this job. It doesn't mean that I'm any less effective, I hope, at being able to do this. I can still read Torah. I can still teach everyone. And then the reality of modernity means if Vayikra was making, if Emor, right, if this Parsha was saying, we're going to disqualify these people to make their lives easier for themselves and for everyone, that's not really compassion. That's other people deciding for the people who are disabled. Which, my personal opinion, this is Rabbi Adrian's opinion, it's a form of ableism. You know, ableism, it's when ableism is when it's kind of hard to describe it. Here's an example. Someone assuming that because I have issues hearing, I can't read Torah. Like, I don't hear the trope, I don't understand what I'm saying, therefore, oh, Adrian, you don't need to read Torah, you're never going to read Torah, don't bother with it. That's a very ableist take. I did have someone say that to me once. Needless to say, they never said it again because I laned the week after, and it was great. It was okay. It was my first time laning, so I only went up from there. So just because someone is disabled does not mean they are not capable of doing the same jobs that we can do today. They may need to adapt them, like in the case of the priest whose eyes are constantly running. Maybe he just needs someone to dab his eyes afterwards. Or if you have someone whose hands are actually, like in the case of the Megillah, right? If someone's got a physical defect, but everybody's used to it, then for them, that person isn't disabled. That person is a member of the community who is qualified to do the job, and that person should be allowed to do that job. I'm roughly out of time, it looks like, because we still have to bench, and then we have Mariv, and then we've got Havdalah. But before I step away and try to get my hands on an oatmeal raisin cookie, I just want to leave you all with this idea that instead of viewing a disabled person as someone who has a defect or as someone who isn't qualified to be in community or like do the things that you can do. Instead, extend a hand towards them and be like, what can I do to make it so that you can be a full participating member and actually listen to what they're saying instead of assuming you know what they need. Because sometimes, what they say about assumptions, they make a butt out of you and me.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.